And often the elders, they don't want to share them with their children because they think it will hurt them and it will burden them. I realized there was a lot of healing that also happened when people heard stories they hadn't heard before. There was a lot of smiling and exchanging of stories. It was kind of like a celebration of life. You want to be remembered and you want to be heard. You have to be willing to walk this path. It's a journey, and there's so many things that come out of it that are helpful, constructive, and then the family gets to enjoy it while they're still here.
Good morning. Welcome to podcast of New Way Home Care, Connecting is Caring. In this podcast, we try to connect the hidden gems in our community, the hidden stories in our community, the hidden resources in our community. Today, we want to share a very special guest with us, Pat Kramer. Pat is very unique in what she does. I'm going to read this out. Pat writes senior memoirs, family histories, business histories, and books for business professionals who wants to showcase their experience. Pat, honestly, out of all the different kind of professionals I get to interact with, you're the only one who does what you do. So thank you for coming on our show.
I'm happy to be here.
Let's start with getting to know you, how your childhood was and where you were raised and all the good stuff.
Oh, good. Well, I grew up in Massachusetts in a city called Worcester. Always loved to read. I was, one of those kids that took out as many books as they allowed at the bookmobile. And we had bookmobiles once a week. They would come to our elementary school and I would read all of the books that I got within that week. Maybe 4 or 5 of them a week. And I just loved to read. I also loved the older people in my life, my grandparents. My grandfather was only with me for 11 years. My grandmother, I got to have for 33 years.
Wonderful.
And my maternal grandmother was with me for 16 years. I didn't know my maternal grandfather. He passed away before I was born. My grandmother on my dad's side and I were very close, and I always spent time with her and enjoyed that time. So I think it's just sort of a tradition for me to celebrate seniors and listen to their stories.
So, Pat, in your own words, tell me what you do.
I interview the seniors that come into my life as memoir clients. Usually their family members ask me to write their memoirs. Occasionally it's the seniors themselves, but usually it's the children. I listen to their stories. I interview them. I ask them a lot of questions. We develop a rapport. We talk on an ongoing basis. It could be several months. It could be over the course of several years. I have one client I've been with for 5 years. She never seems to want this to end. It is a family history that we're doing for her family, but most of them are singular for either one person or a couple. And then sometimes I do memoirs as tributes to people who have passed away. So the family members that remain tell me the stories about those people. And I resurrect them with the stories that I hear, and I write the memoirs about their lives. So I do family memoirs, I do senior memoirs, I do business memoirs, a lot of family businesses that want to have their history and culture preserved. And I think the main scope of my business is to preserve people's legacies and to make sure that they endure through other generations that are to come, so they're not forgotten.
It's a very interesting, very unique thing that you do. How did you get into this?
Well,
what encouraged you to get into this?
I've always been a writer. I had a career as a news broadcaster initially when I got out of college.
Was it for a TV channel? Or?
It was for radio.
Radio, okay.
I worked in radio for almost 10 years. I was a news broadcaster, reporter. I was a producer of news shows. I went out and I interviewed people every day.
You should be sitting here, not me, doing this to you. Right? I mean, you're really done this a long time.
I have. I interviewed, I want to say, thousands of people over the course of those 10 years, and that would not be a mistake. I was out there all the time interviewing people, and I would capture their stories for the news, asking, usually in the news story, you get both sides of any issue. So if there was any kind of mishap going on in a town that I was covering, I would have to interview several people for that story, get different viewpoints on what had happened. In the case of the memoirs I write, that's similar because I'll be interviewing a senior And maybe the children of the senior will say, actually, that's not the way it happened. Let me give you my story. So sometimes I incorporate other people into those stories. So I got a degree in college in communications. I worked in radio for 10 years, all around New England. So Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. I worked at a lot of different radio stations, I think 7 or 8. I loved writing, but I didn't like the hours. I didn't like the pay. I didn't like that I didn't get holidays off, because in radio, you can't take a day off. So I would work 6 days a week. But I decided after taking a hiatus for a couple of years, I actually worked in marketing and promotions in the cable TV industry, which in the 1980s was still much in a growth stage. I got to do that at the beginning of the cable TV industry. I realized that I missed being a writer. I was very good at sales. I was good at promotions, but I wasn't writing on a regular basis. So I transitioned back into being a news writer. I actually moved to California in 1988. And in 1990, I started my own business as writer for hire and began writing directly for business people, for any content for promoting their companies, and also individuals, doing resumes and bios and various other components that people need to promote themselves. The memoir portion and the book portion of my business, I started doing kind of as a little side hobby. I wrote my own family's memoirs for all 4 grandparents. And I realized when I was in the process of doing that I really loved resurrecting history. I learned how many hours it was going to take and how many months it was going to take to do this. And once I had written the memoirs and gotten all the family members who were involved interviewed and incorporated all their stories, I printed it and sent it out to my family, and they really loved it. And there was a lot of communication that came about because of those memoirs. People started talking to one another and comparing their stories. And, oh, I'd never heard that about Grandma. I realized there was a lot of healing that also happened when people heard stories they hadn't heard before. There was a lot of smiling and exchanging of stories. It was kind of like a celebration of life, except it was happening in many cases when people were still alive. And I think that's the best gift you can give to a senior, is to pay homage to them while they're still alive, listen to their stories, and acknowledge how meaningful their stories are. It's a real gift.
How many books you have written so far?
Well, books and memoirs, probably about 40 or 50.
Wow, that's a lot of books.
A lot of them are just for the families. Some of them are published online and other people can read them.
So when you write a book for somebody else or on behalf of somebody else, how do you make it feel like it's their voice coming through, the language, the emotions? And when somebody reads it, it should feel like, I'm reading the book that person has written, right? How do you get, you need to get that feeling, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm a writer and those people aren't. So they can't write their stories down. They can tell their stories, but what often happens is with seniors is they go back and forth in time when they're telling a story. They will start telling me a story and then they'll say, oh, wait a minute. And they'll go sideways into another story. And sometimes we go down a rabbit hole and we go into a whole nother story. And then I'll bring them back with my question. So tell me more about your son and what happened in, 1982. And they'll come back and they'll start talking again. So what I end up with at the end of that session, I will take the transcript from that session, I'll review it, and I'll take it apart like a jigsaw puzzle, and I have to put it back together in the correct order. So, of course, you can't have them going sideways and in all other directions. You wouldn't be able to read it, for one thing. So I take it apart, I put it back together in the correct order, I capture their voice in telling that story throughout the whole story, the way that they have told it to me, but better. They get to tell me their story. I improve upon it as a writer, because I know how to, do that. I've done it every day of my life, probably for, I want to say 40 years, 45 years. So, there's a lot of work that goes into building the memoir. It has to be written so it captures their voice. It also has to be written so a reader can follow it. And it has to also be interesting enough for people to read. So I try to inject that into their stories. So when I say I improve upon it, that's actually what I'm doing. I'm adding things
the readability part of it.
I'm adding what I believe they want me to say from what they actually couldn't tell me because they weren't able to. They didn't have the words. But I instinctively know what they're trying to say from what they've already said. And then, of course, I bring it back to them to review and say, did I capture this correctly? And they will go through it and they will tell me what they want me to change. And I will change it to what they want. Sometimes I'll say I wouldn't advise you to change it that way because that's not correct English. I work with people from many different countries, probably 25 different countries at this point. And so people have a habit, if they're not native English speakers, of speaking with double negatives. To give you an example, they'll say, this happened to her instead of she did this. He didn't do what he would have done. And they say it in convoluted ways that I will say, oh,
it doesn't flow through correctly.
He did do it?
Yeah.
Instead of he didn't do it the way. So I will go back and I will improve upon it. And then they will read it and they will tell me, this is what I meant to say. Oh, that person I named, that was the wrong person. It was actually this person. And I gave you the year wrong. Let's change the year to this. A lot of that is just natural in the process of remembering a story. The first time you tell it, it's kind of vague, but the second time you come back and revisit it, you remember more details. So we always go back and revisit the stories at least twice, if not 3 or 4 times, because the process is you're building a memoir. You're not just writing a first draft. We're going to go when it's completed, we're going to go through the whole first draft and we're going to get a second draft. We're going to review the second draft and get a third draft. And in the process, they may remove some of those stories because now they're thinking about who's going to read it. I don't want them to think about it in the first draft. I want them to tell me everything so I know what the whole story is because I don't know what's missing until they tell me these things. But once we have the whole story, we'll say, okay, who do you want to give your story to? And if you have a story there that's kind of negative about one of your children, maybe we could say it in a different way that isn't caustic or berating the person because you don't want to leave.
You don't want to upset them too.
You don't want to punish them with your memoir either. Although some people do want to.
So what surprises people most once they're into the process with you to write their book?
Always tell them this is a process. We don't know where it's going to go until we get there. We start with 50-hour retainer. 50 hours includes probably 5 or 6 interviews of an hour and a half. And the rest is writing time and reviewing the drafts and making changes to those drafts. But we will need to add time on. So I always tell them 50 hours is not really going to be enough unless it's a very short memoir, maybe less than 50 pages. We can do 50 pages if that's all you want. And if you're on a budget, if you want to have an expanded budget that tells your whole story and you can afford to do 150 hours, we can do a much nicer memoir and you won't have the time constraints on you. I think most people feel the cost is not excessive with my memoir writing. And I think also it's important enough to them to have a written record of their legacy. And if that is something that they want to preserve, as opposed to letting people remember them, however, the cost isn't going to be an issue. In the end.
Family histories and senior memoirs can surface some beautiful memories that have been long forgotten and sometimes some sad memories too, right? How do you navigate all that?
I let them cry when they want to cry. I let them tell me whatever they want to tell me. If they have stories that they haven't told to their children, usually they will tell me because I'm an impartial witness and they need to get it off their chest, unburdens them to tell someone else.
It's very liberating for them.
It's liberating. It's healing for them. I had a woman from Cambodia who had spent 4 years in the jungles of Cambodia in the 1970s, late 1970s. This is after the American troops left Vietnam and Cambodia fell to the communists.
Uh-huh.
She escaped with her family after almost 4 years in the jungle, starving, and her sister's family did not. They were murdered.
Oh, wow.
And she had to tell those stories to someone. She never told them to her own son, but she was willing to tell me. And after our memoir writing was done, she told me that she experienced nightmares about those 4 years of living in the jungle her whole life for 40 years.
Oh, my goodness.
And
she was
carried
carrying
the
that
weight of what had happened to her and her sister. And she said, since I put this on paper, I don't have the nightmares anymore. They don't visit me and wake me up anymore.
So you're right. It's very healing.
It's very healing. Another woman who survived the internment camps with her family when she was age 8 to age 12 had never told her daughters and her son about what it was like in the internment camp. She told them it was too painful to talk about, and she also never spoke about it with her own siblings after that period of time. She told me the whole story, though. She told me all kinds of stories. And interestingly, some of those stories were joyful, where she actually had a good time living there because she made friends. And she told me how she and her friends found a weak place in the fence and would crawl under it and go to a penny candy store and buy candy. And she had this big smile on her face when she told me that story. And they would sneak back in with their candy after they ate almost all of it. And they would hide that secret from their parents. And they felt like independence. They had some independence that their parents didn't have because of that experience. And they felt like they were getting away with something. And she said, when we were little kids, my father made us work every day since we were old enough to walk. And they were migrant farmers. So he would put them out in the field and make these little kids pull weeds. She said, we never had time to play with our friends after school until we got to the internment camp. And all of a sudden, we had friends we could play with.
It's very, very interesting, the experiences some people have gone through in their life. And it must feel very special for you to share those moments with them, right?
It's wonderful for me to hear it. It's even better for them to get to share it with their families once it's written. I did get to share a lunch with the children of this woman and my client. Her name was Dorothy. After the memoir had been completed, her oldest daughter, who had actually hired me, she said, I'm so grateful to you for getting those stories because we never would have known about it. My mom has dementia and she's starting to slip. Because you captured those stories now, we now know what her life was like, and she would never tell us. I'm there to help the families with the release of those stories that are traumatizing, and often the elders, they don't want to share them with their children because they think it will hurt them and it will burden them, and they don't want to share that burden. And you see that with a lot of veterans, a lot of men. They don't share their stories about the wars. They just don't.
I know.
But if they have someone to talk to, it's healing for them. Even if I'm the only one that hears it, they get to unburden themselves to me.
My wife, she was attending one program with me. We were doing something. And then after that meeting presentation, she just looked at me and said, how come you never shared this with our boys? And that's when I realized, how private I am and how much I have not shared. And it hasn't come very natural for me in that sense.
It doesn't for a lot of people. Cultures set the limits on how we express ourselves. And depending on what culture you were raised in, often it's forbidden to talk about people who have died.
Yeah, that's true in our culture, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You you don't mention their name. And if you do mention their name, you have to quickly say something like, God rest their soul, or,
Yes.
may they rest in peace.
Yes.
I saw that with my own family. My grandmother and grandfather on my dad's side, they were from Russia, Jewish culture, and they just didn't talk about people who died. And my grandmother lost one of her brothers very early in life. I think he was 40. I didn't know him. I wanted to know, why didn't you ever mention this brother? Well, may he rest in peace. He's been gone a long time. We're not going to talk about him. And that was the end of that story. But I did find out how he died from another relative, but my grandmother wouldn't tell me.
And some of the memories they would have just locked away and not wanting to open that door again.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
I'll tell you another story, and this is really interesting. I was hired by a woman here in California to write a tribute memoir. Her mother was still alive but had full-on dementia. Her father had passed, and she wanted the story to be about her parents, from her point of view and from theirs, from things they had written that she gave me. So her father had been a poet on the side, a little hobby. So we incorporated his poems into the memoir. Her mother had given a speech at a Rotary Club. We incorporated that speech into the memoir. And then we told the stories about them from her perspective and also from her two surviving brothers' memories. I learned in the process that she had had a sister too, and her sister had died, and all I knew is her sister had died. When I started talking to the brothers and to the children of the sister, I found out she had committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
And the children would tell me, but the brothers wouldn't tell me. But the children of this woman told me that she was bipolar. She was undiagnosed till later. It was just a real burden for her to live. And it was painful, and she had a lot of problems throughout her life. I said to my client, would it be okay to tell your sister's story from her children's point of view? And could we incorporate that in your family memoir? Because she was a part of your family, and she shouldn't be forgotten. And she said, I never thought about that. I interviewed the children. We talked about their mother, which gave them a healing because they hadn't talked about it. And, this was their mother. They loved her, and they wanted to talk about her, but no one else would talk to them about her. But I was able to resurrect their mother, and then I got the brothers of my client to also add stories, and then eventually my client added stories about her sister. And so her sister did have a place in the family memoir.
That's beautiful. So what do you think is lost when a generation passes without creating their own memoirs or recording the story?
Good question, Sam. So much. We lose the stories about the history of the family. We lose the stories about the old country, what the culture was, how they were brought up, what their culture dictated. When you learn that, you learn why they are the way they are, what their personalities were like, and why their personalities were the way they were. I'll give you an example. I'm doing a memoir for a woman now whose grandmother was German, actually all four grandparents. But this particular grandmother was, she said, very bitter and not very loving or affectionate. And she, as a result, did not ever get close to that grandmother. What she learned about that grandmother through going back and getting records of the history of the family was that the grandmother lost two sons in World War II. Those were her only sons. She lost them both in World War II. And the grief caused her to never want to love again. And that's why she couldn't be loving toward her grandchildren, her female grandchildren. However, she was very loving toward her male grandchildren.
Okay, yeah.
In writing this memoir, my client realized, I understand now. I understand why she was the way she was. So if you don't know the history and you don't actually look at it from the point of view of that person's life, you don't understand why they are or were the way they were in life. It brings so much healing to the whole family. It brings an awareness. There's also the genetic issue. If you learn how people in the family died, you find common reasons for people genetically. And that's helpful to the surviving family members because now you know my family has a history of heart disease or cancer or diabetes or whatever it is. It's very important to know your family history. It's very informative to know the culture and how that influenced people because, we carry that generational trauma through the current generation. And there's a lot of research that indicates that if your mother was going through trauma when she was carrying you, you're carrying that trauma too on some level. There's a lot of truth to generational trauma. I know families, survivors of the Holocaust whose children carried the weight of their parents and the pain and the grief, and they couldn't shake loose, even though they didn't go through that. Their parents did, and it formed their personalities. So I think it's very important to be as aware as you can of where you come from. And there's also the regrets if you don't.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I hear, I wish I had asked my grandmother or my mother or my father about those experiences and they had in their life, but I didn't. I didn't take the time because it wasn't important at the time. And now they're gone and I'll never be able to do that. I hear that all the time. But again, we can resurrect those people if people are willing to tell me the stories they do know.
Okay.
And there's a certain amount of research that I can do to find more information about those people.
When you're engaged with a client, writing about their life, do you feel like you're walking in their shoes, and do you get affected with the stories that you hear at all?
Sometimes. The woman who I told you about from Cambodia, she told me some horrific stories that I will never be able to forget about what they were exposed to during those 4 years. The Khmer Rouge soldiers, they called them children soldiers. They were recruited from the villages in Cambodia that were basically uneducated people because, in the communist culture, they wanted people who were uneducated to be leading the culture going forward. These people, these soldiers, they were children. They were anywhere from 11 years old to 21 or more.
Wow.
And they were carrying guns. And if they felt offended in any way by the way someone spoke to them, or even how those people looked, they would take out guns and kill them on the spot. And she said people were murdered in front of them all the time. And it could be as simple as they wore glasses. Because in that culture, they felt if you wore glasses, you were educated. And they didn't want educated people because they were a threat. So they killed a lot of people just because they had glasses on.
Just because they looked educated.
And I said to her, well, what if the people took their glasses off? And she said, a lot of people tried that. But then they would test them and say, how far, can you see what's on that fence there? And if the person couldn't see the apple on the fence, they'd shoot him.
Goodness.
A lot of those stories still stay with me that she told me. I carry them. But you know what? I unburdened her from carrying them. And I can go on with my life. She had to carry that as part of hers.
So who is your ideal client, and what does working with you look like in terms of time and investment?
An ideal client is someone who cares about their history or cares about their parents' history and who is willing to dedicate the time, which could be, 1 to 2 or more years.
Okay.
And I'm saying this totally based on experience. Older people move at a slower pace. It isn't my pace. If I could get it done in 6 months, I would. I move at their pace. What's comfortable for them to do an interview.
And they have the life going on.
They have travel. They have kids visiting.
Yes.
They get sick. They have doctor's visits. When I'm hired, I work with them at their pace. I work mostly with people who have money set aside to spend anywhere from, on the low end, $15,000 to it could be $30,000. If that is not going to be a problem for someone and it's worth it to them and they have money to do this, if it's important to them, that is not going to be an issue. I've worked with people who had $5,500. I can do something with it, not a lot, but I can do something with it, maybe 3 interviews at the most. And we'll print it digitally, and it won't be, I say printed. Maybe we'll print it in, a print shop with a cardstock cover, and they'll have a digital copy. Costs have gone up since the 5,500 memoir that I wrote, so maybe now it's more like 6,500 or 7,500. But still, I would say 7,500, 6,500. We could do something very small. Most of my clients average around 15,000. Some of them are in the 25,000 or 30,000 range. These are people who have put aside money for their legacy, for documenting and leaving behind something for their families. Keep in mind, and I hear this from wealth advisors all the time, it isn't just the money that they're leaving for future generations. They want their stories also captured, because money is gone in a blink of an eye, but the stories stay,
yes,
and are there to pass down for maybe 3, 4, 5 generations to come that will never meet them. And that legacy is as important as the money they leave, because they want to be remembered. And if they don't have something in their own words that they can know that's going to be preserved, someone else is going to tell their stories, and who knows how they're going to tell them, or if they're going to be accurate. And after maybe 2 generations, they may be forgotten completely.
So if you want to be heard, you got to tell it yourself.
If you want to be remembered and you want to be heard, you have to be willing to walk this path. Yeah. It's a journey, but it's a beautiful journey. And there's so many things that come out of it that are helpful and constructive. And then the family gets to enjoy it while they're still here. I've only had one client pass away before their memoir was done. The majority of them, they get them done. This particular client had pancreatic cancer and didn't get diagnosed. And unfortunately, it was a very quick cancer. And we were almost at the finish line. We just had one more proofing to do, and she never made time for it. So it's in the hands of her children now, and I'm hoping they will finish it.
Okay. So if someone has been thinking about writing their own life story, their memoir and things like that, and has not yet started, been thinking about it for years, and what would you tell them?
I would say get started right away, because we're not promised another day. We're not promised next week. Even young people don't know how long they have. Don't put it off. Now, there are services other than mine that you can do. It's a do-it-yourself thing, like LegalZoom. You're your own lawyer.
Or AI.
AI things.
Yeah.
I will say that they're not customized to telling someone's individual story. They don't ask you the questions and go into depth. They aren't real people that you're having a conversation with. I have had people tell me, Mom started one of those things that you write an answer to a question every week, but what you have is just a generic document.
Yeah.
And sometimes they can't finish it themselves because it's time consuming and it's tiring. They don't want to hold a pen for a long period of time to write. You get what you get with those services. You get a very basic, generic something. I'm not sure what. That is, for people who want to do it that way, that's fine. Those aren't my ideal clients. My clients are people who want a person to interview their loved one, and they want the healing stories that are going to come out of it to share with their family. And they want someone to guide them through the whole process because they can't do it themselves. And the children don't have time nor the wherewithal to do it.
So mostly it is the older adult who is calling you for this?
Majority of times, they're age 70 to 90.
70 to 90, okay.
I have a couple of clients in their 90s right now that I'm working with. One man who is so sharp, he puts me to shame. He was telling me a story last week about the couple sitting across from he and his wife on their honeymoon, and he remembered their names. Wow. He's very sharp. A lot of people aren't as sharp in their 90s. In their 70s, yes. In their 60s, even better. I would say get started as soon as you can. I had one client who actually presented me with a memoir he had written from the time he was 18 up to the age of 50. And it was a rough draft, but he gave me all of the pages, and I worked with him as his editor to pull together the stories and write it in the correct way. And because he had written it at the various stages of his life, we had a very accurate record.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I had to ask him questions to fill in the blanks because a lot of the entries were very, very basic. He remembered the name of his headmaster in primary school, but he couldn't tell me anything about the man.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back in time, he could describe him to me from the adult perspective. As a child, he couldn't, that's not something you talk about,
Uh-huh.
But as an adult, I was able to go back and ask him a lot of questions and fill in the blanks and bring color, action into his memoir, which was missing. It was very dry and bland. I have done that with a couple of people who gave me piles of paper. Like I had one man give me his document. It was over 300 pages. He had written it and had someone type it. There were no page numbers. They were out of order. And then some of the pages were printed on both sides and some of them were one-sided.
Uh-huh.
And then he also had the person that typed it cut it up and put it back together with tape. You can imagine what that was like. I had to retype the whole document.
Retype the whole thing. Okay.
Because that person didn't have it as a Word file. Got rid of it, apparently.
Wow.
So I did manage to produce a book for him. And it's a beautiful book, but it wouldn't have ever gotten done if he had tried to do it himself. So
yeah, I mean, people have
never
writer's
know.
block too, right? No, not everybody can write.
No, and some people enjoy the process of writing and others really don't.
Yeah.
But they like to talk. Almost everyone likes to talk. Even people who you would think don't like to tell stories.
Uh-huh.
I can usually get it out of them. I will say when you're a news reporter,
Uh-huh.
and your job is to get the story. If someone doesn't answer a direct question that you ask, you ask it a different way. If they don't answer that question, you ask it another way. And eventually you do get an answer to your question because you just didn't say it the way that they wanted to hear it. But most people wouldn't take the time to do that. The children won't because they don't know how to do that. And not everyone is a news reporter or has that background as a journalist. So I believe I bring to the job something very unique in wanting to hear stories as an interviewer, write stories as a writer,
Mm-hmm.
and then manage the project to capture the voice of the individual that I've written it for so that the family has those stories because they're the ones who need those stories.
Pat, this has been wonderful. I mean, I learned so much about you, learned so much about what you do, the whole process. I almost felt like I was walking in your shoes, when you wrote this book about others. Thank you for coming on our show. Finally, if somebody were to reach out to you and they want to write the book, how do they find you?
Writer for Hire is my company name, but you will find me at writerpatkramer.com. So writer, W-R-I-T-E-R, Pat, P-A-T, Kramer, K-R-A-M-E-R, writerpatkramer.com. That's my website. You will find me on LinkedIn. You will find me on Yelp as Writer for Hire or Writer Pat Kramer. You'll find me on my Google business page. You're welcome to leave a review of this podcast if you enjoyed it. I'd love to have you leave a review on Yelp or my Google page because that's how people become acquainted with the memoir writing process. And I want people to know about it and know that they can turn to me if they need somebody. I love what I do. I enjoy talking to seniors, even difficult ones. I want to help as many people as possible with the work that I do. So I thank you, Sam, for that.
Thank you, Pat, for coming on our podcast. I really appreciate your time.
They can also email me,
Uh-huh.
pat@writerpatkramer.com.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sam. And what you do is very important with New Wave Home Care. You service people in their homes and you give them the needed support so that they can spend as much time in places of comfort as they would desire to do. And they couldn't do that without your services. So I thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Pat, for saying that. I really appreciate it.